Hello, welcome back to our countdown to Christmas Day. Today is the 8th of December, and we've got another video where we're putting some Necron units up against one another, talk about the advantages and disadvantages of why you would take them if you were to dedicate a list around those said units. Now yesterday we did Luminazaras versus 2 Technomancers. If you missed that one, you'll find that in the playlist, possibly in the top right of the screen now. I will be putting a link. Also, don't forget there is a giveaway ongoing throughout December. All you need to do is simply be subscribed, like the video, and comment on which unit you would prefer in that particular video. We're doing a video right up to the 24th of December, and a draw will be made for the winner after Christmas. Right, so let's get on to today's video, and we've got 3 versus 1 this time. We've got 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers versus a Doom Scythe. Roll the transition. Let's begin the video with the points cost. So if you're taking 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, of course that's going to be 150 points for the unit, whereas a Doom Scythe is 165, so a 15 points difference there, not too big of a difference. Now of course those Lokhust Heavy Destroyers are infantry units from the heavy support selections, whereas the Doom Scythe is a flyer, and both of these units have the core keyword. So let's start the comparison off with the data sheets. In fact, starting with the movement is quite key here. The Lokhust Heavy Destroyers are moving 8 inches, which is pretty decent, but those Doom Scythes are going to be moving between 20 and 50 inches, so there's a minimum of 20 inch movement. And the reason why that is so key is because you're going to almost guarantee yourself line of sight. With the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, you don't always guarantee line of sight. It's going to be a lot of line of sight blocking terrain, or just general range of the board, whereas with the Doom Scythe, you've got 20 to 50 inches to get to where you want to go, and hopefully you're going to get past those terrain features which are blocking line of sight. Let's move on to the toughness. The Doom Scythe has a toughness value of 6, whereas the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers are only toughness 5. Toughness 5 is still pretty good, don't get me wrong, but it's worth noting that the Doom Scythe is slightly tougher. We then come on to the wounds characteristics, and the Doom Scythe has 12, whereas the Heavy Lokhust Destroyers are 4 apiece, but when you're buying 3 of them, that will in fact equal 12. So in terms of wounds, it's actually identical. We then come on to 3 more statistics, which is the weapon skill, the strength, as well as the attacks. Neither of these are that important. This is for melee units, and yeah, neither of these units should be in combat, so I'm going to completely ignore those 3 stats. But as far as stats go, of course we prefer the Doom Scythe. It's got the better movement, the better toughness, and that's all you really need here. Right, unique abilities for both these units. So, of course, the Destroy Cult units, such as your Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, have got the Hardwire for Destruction ability, so they're re-rolling ones to hit. And also they've got the Repulsor Platform ability, so they can move with their heavy weapons. Going to be very useful. Again, talking about line of sight here, you don't want to be staying stationary and your opponent just simply gets behind a terrain feature, knowing you can't target them without a penalty, but thankfully these guys can move and still fire as normal. As for the Doom Scythe, well, it's got the hard to hit ability, so it's a -1 to hit, that's at all times, that's pretty nice. And it's also got the airborne ability, so only units with the fly keyword can charge it, so that's not too bad of a defense. Your standard melee based infantry on foot aren't going to be able to get the charge off on our flyer. And finally they've got the supersonic ability, which is actually a negative, not a positive. It's a 90-degree pivot restriction for movement. You can't literally flip it 180, it's got to be within a 90-degree pivot. Now, even though I quite like that hard to hit ability with the Doom Scythe, I'm definitely going to have to give this one to the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. Re-rolling hit rolls of a 1. That's the main reason for taking either of these units, is their range capabilities, which we're going to kind of go on to that in a moment. Right, onto the weapons. First of all, I just want to disregard a few weapons here just for this comparison. The Emetic Exterminators that are available to the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, that's the anti-infantry weapons. We're not talking about those today. They are available to these guys, but this comparison is mainly about the big heavy weapon, which is the Gorse Destructor. That's a 36-inch range weapon, heavy 1, strength 10, -4 AP, and the damage is 3d3. Now with the Doom Scythe, it does have the Twin Tesla Destructor, but again, I don't really want to compare that weapon. It is just an added bonus that it can do some damage at light infantry, but I really want to talk about the Heavy Death Ray today, which is 36-inch range, heavy 3, strength 12, -4 AP, and the damage is d3 plus 3. So that's an average damage of 5, whereas the Lokhust Heavy Destroyer's average is an average of 6. But the reason why this is a really good comparison is with the Doom Scythe, you're getting a flat 3 shots. You're not getting any d6 shots like we do with the other heavy support options, it's just a flat 3 shots. And of course with 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, you're also getting 3 shots. So not a bad comparison to make. Let's talk about the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers to begin. So they've got 3 shots, they're re-rolling ones. If you're going up against toughness 5 or less, you're likely causing around 1.94 wounds. That's before any armor saves are made, or there isn't really going to be an armor save, it's more likely going to be an invuln save, or nothing. If they're going up against toughness 6 to toughness 9, that goes down slightly to 1.56. Now when you compare that to the Doom Scythe's average figures, we're going up against toughness 6 or less, not toughness 5 or less, because it starts at strength 12, so they've got a little bit more of a buffer. You're only getting 1.67 wounds on average with the heavy death ray going up against toughness 6 or less, and going up against toughness 7 to toughness 9, you're getting 1.3. So you're getting slightly less in terms of averages from the heavy death ray on the Doom Scythe, and that's because they're not re-rolling ones. However, we do then need to bring back the twin Tesla Destructor, because that's where it slightly makes up those numbers. But with this one, I think I'm going to score this point to the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. The 3d3 damage is much more superior, having an average of 6, potentially 9. Whereas with the Doom Scythe, it is d3 plus 3, which is an average of 5. But there, the most you can get there is a 6, which is actually what the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers average anyway. Okay, next we're on to unique synergy for each of these units. Starting off with the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, they've of course got the United in Destruction aura ability coming from, say, the Scorpic Lord or maybe the Lokhust Lord, because they're all destroy occult units. Something that the Doom Scythe can't do, of course. Second of all, the Rites of Reanimation ability, be bringing back one of these models within a unit because they're core. Now yes, the Doom Scythe is core, but it's only one single model, so you can't be bringing back a model once it has been destroyed. Whereas if you lose 2 out of 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, and you've only got 1 remaining, you can still target them for Rites of Reanimation. I then wanted to briefly mention Maya Will Be Done from, say, a Necron Overlord, maybe a Catacomb Command Barge. Again, this can be done with the Doom Scythe because it's got the core keyword, but because it's moving between 20 and 50 inches every turn with that 90-degree pivot, you're not likely going to be in range all the time for that Maya Will Be Done ability, whereas with these Lokhust Heavy Destroyers only moving 8 inches, yeah, they're pretty much certainly going to always have that Maya Will Be Done cast on them if you've selected to do that synergy. I mean, there's plenty of other options, in fact, with the core keyword, such as the Veil of Darkness relic. Maybe there's things like the Royal Warden, perhaps, to get them out of combat to fire. All these things are not really going to be that usable with a Doom Scythe. Then the final piece of unique synergy I wanted to mention is the new Army of Renown from the Annihilation Legion. So they're eligible to be taken in the Annihilation Legion, and there's a few stratagems that are in there that are worth looking at. First of all, the Efficient Disintegration stratagem, which will be a +1 to all damage, so that could be 3d3 plus 1. Or optionally, a Moment of Clarity to give them objective secured. Now you can get that naturally with the Nihilak Dynasty or Eternal Conquerors, but if you're not taking that and you're taking, say, the Army of Renown, they don't get a Dynasty code anyway, so yeah, this is a way of getting objectives secured on your guys. Now the Doom Scythe, there's not really any synergy for them, is there? I mean, because they're moving so fast as mentioned, the core keyword, is it really going to come into play that often? Yes, you can use Maya Will Be Done, yes you can use the Lord's Will and all that kind of stuff, but likelihood is they're going in solo and not synergizing with much of the codex. Let's talk about the overall purpose within the game for these two units. Starting off with the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, they've of course got the big guns at the back that are doing a ton of damage. They've also got a secondary use as a backline objective holder. I mean, they are toughness 5 and 4 wounds after all, that's per model. Having a unit of 3 of them is definitely going to defend an objective. And also, if you are keeping them on your home objective, if you spread them out slightly, they can be a home objective screen for anti-deep strike options that your opponent may or may not have. As for the Doom Scythe and the main purpose for taking a Doom Scythe, well, it's the big gun again, but this time you're going to be able to find line of sight much easier, because he's flying around the board pretty quick, going over terrain and all that kind of stuff. And secondly, the Doom Scythe is going to be a huge distraction very early on. Your opponent isn't going to like the fact that you've got a high damage weapon that's flying around the board. You're not really going to be able to hide this thing, so yeah, they're going to take their shots very early on to get rid of it. Okay, into the main summary of the video, which is the advantages and disadvantages of both of these units. Starting off with the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, advantages are as follows. So they're moving and firing their heavy weapons, they're re-rolling ones to hit. The damage they've got is 3d3, which is pretty good. They can hold objectives, whereas the Doom Scythe can't hold objectives. They've got synergy with other characters. And you can actually hide one with the Lokhust Destroyers, which we haven't actually mentioned in this video yet. If you've got a standard Lokhust Destroyer unit, you can hide one of these Lokhust Heavies within that unit. I've put here wounds are spread over 3 models. I just probably have to explain that slightly. What I mean by that is if you've got, say, a damage 5 weapon coming from your opponent's unit, as these are only 4 wound models, 1 damage from that damage 5 weapon is going to be completely gone to waste because you can only put 4 on a unit, it doesn't spill over to the next one. Whereas if you're firing at the Doom Scythe, all 5 of that damage will be planted on the Doom Scythe. So sometimes it helps you out. It's also going to help you out with, say, damage 3 as well. If they're getting 2 damage 3 weapons onto our guys, the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, the first one's going to take 3 wounds off. These guys are going to then have 1 wound remaining. And then the second one's going to do another 3 damage. So you've actually wasted 2 damage there for your opponent as well. And finally, the option of reanimation protocols. Now, it's not going to be that easy with these guys, don't get me wrong. When you've got 4 wounds, trying to reanimate them, yeah, it's not very likely you bring them back, but it's something the Doom Scythe can't do. Now, disadvantages, for the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers are as follows. So not always get in line of sight, we've kind of mentioned that already with the movement of the Doom Scythe. It's going to be quite easy for your opponent to hide away behind obscuring terrain or any kind of terrain really, especially in turn 1. They are strength 10, which is slightly less than strength 12. Now strength 10 is still really good, don't get me wrong. You wound in toughness 5 on 2+, but as soon as it gets to toughness 6 you now need a 3+, whereas the strength 12 weapon still wounds on a 2. And finally the toughness is only toughness 5, not toughness 6. That's the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. What about the Doom Scythe? Advantages: so gains line of sight pretty easily with that movement. They got toughness 6, not toughness 5. They're always going to have 3 shots regardless of what's going on. Maybe you've lost 1 or 2 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers from the unit. Now you're only going to have 1 or 2 shots remaining for that unit, whereas the Doom Scythe has always got 3 shots even if it's only got 1 wound left. There are -1 to be hit at range, and units without the fly keyword cannot charge it. That gives it a little bit more defense, especially against the units that actually are pretty good in combat. That's the advantages. The disadvantages are they cost 15 points more than 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. They've got their degrading stat line. So it's the movement, the ballistic skill, and the amount of attacks that gets degraded. Now the attacks isn't that big of a deal. The movement may not be too big of a deal, but definitely the ballistic skill, you don't want to be losing that. They must move the minimum movement. So in some situations your flyer could get cornered off the board because your opponent can literally block out all the landing ground, but you do have the option of flying off the board, I guess. You've got the 90-degree pivot restriction, which kind of relates to the previous point. Also the flyers cannot hold any objectives. And that's for primaries. I mean, even with the secondaries, there's a disadvantage because some of them won't include the flyers to actually score secondary objectives either. And finally, lack of general synergy. Yeah, because they go in solo, they're not going to be synergizing quite as well with the rest of the codex. So that's the 2 units all summed up. It's part of the video now where I select one of these units. Now, I do think the Doom Scythe has got a lot of play, especially in the larger games where you've got extra points spare where you can bring out a Necron flyer. Whereas in most game sizes, whether it's Incursion, whether it's Strike Force, you've always got room for 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. They're probably our best heavy support option within our codex, so that's why I'm going to be selecting the 3 Lokhust Heavy Destroyers today. So guys, that is the end of the video. Let me know down in the comments which you would select. Make sure you're subscribed and liking the video so that you enter our free giveaway for this Combat Patrol box, of course. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.